The following program is paid for by the Rick and Rick at Night Show.
This is Rick and Rick at Night. We're the voice of liberty here in the Ohio River Valley. I'm Rick Roos. My partner Rick Berry and I are delighted to be here once again. How are you, Bulldog?
War Eagle, I am excited to be here, and I'd like to say hello to everybody out there, and we have a really special guest tonight.
We'd like to shout out to and express our true thanks to our friend Doc and DuPont and so many others who have served our country so valiantly. This is a conversation we will hope you will join in, but first we're going to have our friend and candidate for the United States Senate, Indiana State Treasurer Richard Mourdock. And Richard, welcome to the Rick and Rick at Night Show.
Hey, thanks. Great to be back with you again. It's been a little while. Glad to do it.
It has. We'd like to give you frequent flyer points, too, because this is the third time you've been on our show, and we just really appreciate you being here.
You know, I'm thinking maybe we can call this the Rick and Richard show if we get Richard on here much more. Go ahead, Richard. Didn't mean to interrupt you.
And if we go with that Rick and Richard thing, and then we start to go to all the derivatives of the name Richard, we're all going to be embarrassed here. We better stick with what we got.
Richard's actually my middle name, so there you go.
Okay. Right.
How's the campaign going?
It is going fabulously well. You know, it just, in some ways, it seems like it's gone by in a flash. In other ways, it seems like it's been 100 years. But it was February 22nd of 2011 that we kicked off the campaign. And just a week ago on Wednesday, for the first time, the polls show we have taken the lead. So anytime you're running against an incumbent, to have the lead is a good thing. To run against a 36-year, six-term incumbent like Dick Lugar, for us to take the lead is huge. And the news media really picked up on the fact once we released the polling, and we did that polling, everyone thought Lugar would put out some other poll counteracting what we did. It never happened, which tells us he's seeing the same numbers we're seeing.
Well, that really is exciting, Richard. This is Rick Berry, and, you know, before we get into the meat of this interview, I would just like to ask, how do you guys, I don't know, how do you do it? I mean, when you give a speech, and I've listened to a lot of your speeches, it sounds like it's the only speech you're ever going to give. I mean, your heart and soul's in it, and people need to realize you're doing this several times a week, and you're traveling all over the state. How do you do it?
Well, you do what you believe in. It's true, I use not necessarily the same speech, but depending on the audience and depending what may have been said from the podium before I speak, you know, I try to put the comments together and the contents that audience wants to hear about, those issues that are important to them. But honestly, I do it because I believe in it. You know, I've said it many times. It's a wonderful thing for me to be 60 years old and to run for an office I don't have to have. I certainly don't have to have it to have the income, and I certainly don't have to have it to have my ego soothed. I'm doing this because I believe we've got to turn the United States of America into a more conservative country, more strictly following our constitutional values, and I believe that in my heart and soul, so that's what keeps me energized. And I have to say on the subject of energy, too, because I've been thinking a lot about this as we're down to less than 2 weeks to go now. You know, where does the energy come from? I'll tell you, I am constantly being inspired by people who are involved with this campaign, and they've never been involved with the campaign. Sometimes it's kids 16 and 17 years old, and we have a volunteer in our office, 87 years old. His name is Harlan, and he flew for the Army Air Corps over Germany during World War II. Never been involved before. When you see those kind of people coming in, they just fire you up and keep you going.
Well, you know, I know exactly what you're saying because Rick and I was never a political person, and Rick and I never dreamed of having a radio show, 2 years ago. And here we are with a radio show. We've founded the Tea Party here in Jefferson County. We've got people involved with us that never got involved in politics before. There's a passion with all these people, but there's also a fear for the future of our country. And most of these people I deal with, and I know you're the same, have kids. We don't want our kids to be growing up in a country that's totally different than the one we grew up in. And you're right. I mean, you can see the passion. And even though there's a fear for what's happening in the country, there's also an optimism and a joy in the groups I know you deal with and I know that we deal with. What do you have to say about that?
Well, you're right. There is an optimism there. And I'll tell you, I wouldn't be doing this if I thought the glass wasn't always half full. You know, there was the wonderful line of Ronald Reagan from his first inaugural address where he said, "Of course we have every right to dream great dreams. We are Americans." You know, this country has repeatedly done things that other countries can only begin to dream about. And we've done it because there's a sense here that prosperity is not automatic. It is something you have to work for. We've traditionally had a real strong work ethic in this country and a sense of independence from government to live our own lives. Those of us who are motivated right now and, as you said, fearing for the future, sense the government wants to control more and more of our lives through things like Obamacare, and we're done with that. And we want to fight to turn this around, and I'm convinced we're going to, and we're going to be successful.
One of the things, Richard, that I've noticed is that Dick Lugar seems to be pulling the old liberal trick out of the book, where, and after you've been elected overwhelmingly as Indiana State Treasurer twice, you'd think that you'd given up kicking little puppies and throwing people in a ditch. But it was at church the other day. I had a little, one of our listeners come up to me and said, "Is it true Richard Mourdock wants to cut my Social Security and cut my Medicare?" And I said, "That's a lie." What are you going to do with the present system as far as people over 65? What do you think as far as actual reform of those programs to make sure they're still there?
Yeah, well, first to the mailer that was sent out that lady was referring to. I'm running as a Republican because I think Mr. Lugar has gone too far to the left and too often joined with the Democrats. That mailer makes the point because now he's campaigning like a Democrat, because Democrats always want to accuse Republicans of doing away with Social Security, doing away with Medicare. And my answer to that is I think there is a fundamental social contract that government makes with its people. And for the people who are today over the age of 55, everything that has been promised in both Social Security and Medicare, the U.S. government must deliver on. I also think it is immoral to make promises you cannot keep. And right now, when the federal government's telling people who are in their 20s and 30s, well, you'll get the same Social Security benefit as your grandparents, that's a lie. It cannot happen. And we need to start telling people who are between the ages of 50 and 55 and 45 and 50, 40 and 45, yes, it will be there, but it's going to be a different set of promises that we have to make to those people. And frankly, we've got to give younger people more incentives to be able to invest on their own, both for their long-term retirement and their health care. But for people over the age of 55, there is no sense, and believe me, there's no group of Republicans, no groups of Democrats that could ever change those plans if they wanted to, because it would be so politically unpopular.
The one of the things that, and I was privileged to give a speech on your behalf at our Lincoln Day down here, and I actually got heckled by a former mayor. I said that Richard Lugar or Richard Mourdock has been in Madison four times in the last 2.5 years, and as of our Tea Party 2 days ago, you'll have been here 5 times. And Richard, according to our liberal newspaper editor, Lugar has not been here since 2003. I was corrected by our former mayor to say that Richard Lugar had been in Hanover in 2007. I kind of looked, and I'm sitting there going, okay, let's play. I said, Al, there's a 900-pound gorilla in the room. You say he hasn't been here since 2007. I said, do you realize that Richard G. Lugar has not lived in Indiana for the last 35 years? And further, that the election board up in Indianapolis said that he and his wife could not vote in this primary because the residence he was voting from was he sold 35 years ago. But they made a deal. And I think you're aware of that deal, is they said that they were going to use the address as their farm. He hasn't lived there either for 35 years, but they made a deal.
Well, he's actually never lived there.
Okay.
And it's a really ironic and amazing thing. The Election Commission said he could not vote from a house in which he did not live, in which someone else lived, so that now he can vote from a house in which he does not live, in which someone else lives. It is a bizarre situation, but regarding where he votes, I could care less. I never really got involved with that legal issue of his residency, which is about where he votes. And frankly, the reason I didn't get involved with it was because I always figured I'd be getting involved in an argument that I would lose. Somehow, in the end, I thought they would find a way for Dick Lugar to vote here, and in fact, that's what happened. But what's more important, I think, than whether he has a right to vote here or not, is it is the United States Constitution, not Indiana law.
Right.
The United States Constitution sets the qualifications to be a United States Senator. There are only 3 things. Number 1, you must be over the age of 30. Senator Lugar and I both comfortably meet that threshold. Number 2, you must have been a citizen of the U.S. for 9 years. And number 3, and these are the words, when elected, must be an inhabitant of that state. You know, Mr. Lugar has told Candy Crowley live on CNN that he keeps an address here, quote, for political purposes. He spent a lot of money with very high-priced lawyers in this residency case to say, you can't make me live in Indiana. Well, having an inhabitancy means there's some physical presence, and I think there's a real question whether or not he meets that constitutional mandate.
Well, this is, Richard, this is the same kind of smoke and mirrors that we expect from the other side. You know, as a true conservative, if the truth is on our side, we don't have to make excuses. And as far as your campaign goes, I think the number one reason most people are behind you is because you are going to fight for conservative values. One of the main reasons, and we're not here to besmirch Richard Lugar. He's been a great senator for Indiana, and I want to point that out. But I don't think Mr. Lugar is going to fight for our conservative values. We got some examples. He voted for Sotomayor, and he voted for Elena Kagan, saying that you know, we have to respect the president that's in office. And you know, I know, Richard, if you're in office, you're going to fight for conservative values against things like that. Richard also, I think he co-sponsored the DREAM Act, and I want to get into that a little bit. But, you know, if you can speak a little bit to the fact that you're going to fight for conservative values, and I think Richard Lugar's time has come and gone, and I don't think he will.
You're right. I am going to fight, and I say it to every audience. I respect Mr. Lugar. He spent many years in public service. He deserves the respect of all of us. But there was a wonderful editorial just 2 days ago or so in the Wall Street Journal, and it talked about the fact that Mr. Lugar isn't going to be able to negotiate with Harry Reid. Why? Because Harry Reid and Chuck Schumer and the Democrats who are running the U.S. Senate right now, they could care less about negotiation. We do need somebody who's willing to fight. Am I willing to do it? You're absolutely right, I am. You know, in 2009, when the Chrysler bailout took place, I didn't, frankly, look forward to being the only person in the United States to take on the Obama administration and to go to the U.S. Supreme Court, but I did it because it was my duty as an office holder, and more specifically as a fiduciary for pension funds. And I learned from that experience that, you know, sometimes you just got to stand up and be ready to take whatever's coming at you to do the right thing. You know, I'm more frustrated, quite honestly, with Republicans than I am with Democrats. You know, I don't expect to agree with Democrats in Washington, but I'm frustrated with the Republicans who will go to Washington, and even though they will vote the right way most of the time, they won't articulate the argument. They won't go back in front of the unfriendly crowds. They won't go to the liberal news networks and do the talking head shows and make the argument why conservatism is right. It's about reducing the size of government. It's about giving greater individual freedom and allowing prosperity to unfold. You know, those amazing 8 years of the Reagan administration, not one single day during 8 years did Ronald Reagan have a Republican House of Representatives or a Republican Senate. Not one day during those 8 years did he have a sympathetic news media, and yet he got a lot done. Why? Because he would go around the media to make the argument to the American public as to his vision, and those people would force their Democratic congressmen who were in the majority to do those things.
And he always did it with a big smile on his face.
That's right. He was always that optimist, seeing the glass half full, to make people realize there was a better option than bigger government that just takes more and costs too much.
You know, Richard, you talk about that. One thing I fear, and I know it's a fear of most conservatives, we see this these scandals, and namely the number one that I see is the Fast and Furious scandal, and there's a fear among conservatives that this thing's going to come and go and nothing's going to be done, and it could be it could make Watergate look like a walk in the park if the truth would come out from what I've been reading about it.
Well, in this current administration, we just have to face the fact that no one is ever held responsible. And again, this is my frustration with Republicans. Where are the Republican Senate leaders making these arguments right now? How come the Attorney General Holder is still there after Fast and Furious? How come Stephen Chu with the Department of Energy can lose hundreds of millions of dollars making bad loans and he's still there? How is it that our nation has had its first credit rating downgrade in our history, and Tim Geithner is still the Secretary of the Treasury? Nobody is ever held accountable, and even enough Republicans aren't talking about it. They're not making the point to come back to influence the electorate to take a broader look of the entire Obama administration and the party of bankruptcy, which is the National Democratic Party.
Well, they know, I think most of them know they're going to get attacked unmercifully if they do say something. But so you know what? The founders of this country were under, they lived under a death threat the whole time they were doing what they were doing, and they were willing to die for the country. And I don't know if we have those kind of guys in there right now, except maybe for a guy like Alan West, and we've seen him get excoriated for some of the things he said. But you're right. I mean, we need warriors. We don't need guys that like their job and want to keep it.
That's right. I mean, that's one of the beauty, I think, of the potential of having term limits. And I'm very optimistic if we get Republicans controlling the Senate, we can see a real move in that direction. Maybe conservatives controlling the U.S. Senate. But I think we can make that happen, and that is going to start giving people courage when they realize they don't have to be so much worried about the next election. They just need to make the right decision.
One of the things last night at the candidate forum downtown, people are saying, why are you picking on Lugar? He's bringing money back home, and, he's been there forever and all the rest of that stuff. I said, I brought up the residency thing, and I said, I also brought up the liberal voting record. Well, that's the way the game's played. I don't think you're a game player, Richard. I mean that as a complete compliment. I do want to get into the immigration thing, but it just... We need people that have got the stones to stand up and say, this is the Constitution. It was good enough, when it was enacted. It's still good now if we're good enough to use it.
Well, I shouldn't do this, but your metaphor is too perfect.
Okay.
I am a geologist, so I have more than stones. I've got rocks. But, I agree. It is not about just talking. It's not just about going along to get along. It's about going the right direction to get the country back on course. As I've said, being 60 years old to run for an office that I don't have to have is a wonderful, liberating kind of thing. And, I have no expectations of a long-term political career in the United States Senate. I could care less about that. I love having a Sunday afternoon to go ride the motorcycle and just be doing normal things other than speaking to the crowds and doing all that. But I'm willing to set that aside because, as Rick said a minute ago, we all kind of fear for our country right now, and we've got to get it back on course.
I think you're a giant there. And that's why I keep saying I believe in this man. He's the real deal. Well, one of the things, and we said we're going to keep you for 30 minutes. We got like 10 left. But one of the things that I saw from the campaign was the contrast between you and Richard Lugar as far as immigration. And one of the things a couple of years ago I saw in a paper, and I haven't been able to source it. It might be in LexisNexis, but Dick Lugar and Dick Durbin, a liberal senator from Illinois, actually sponsored a workshop for illegal aliens near Evansville. I think it was near Vincennes, but actually having a workshop on how to get government benefits.
Exactly.
This is nuts.
Yeah, I mean, and there are few issues where the difference between Mr. Lugar and myself are more stark than on this issue of immigration. And let's start with this. Here's what I think we need to do with immigration, first of all. Number one, we have to make the borders secure. We need to do it with mechanical fencing. We need to do it with technological fencing. And if necessary, we need to put more boots on the ground down there to make it happen. Number two is we have to put out the word that for those people who are here illegally, that they get the chance, if they want to voluntarily deport themselves, as it's often stated, that if they go back to their countries of origin, go to the U.S. Embassy, go to the U.S. Consulate, and then demonstrate that they've been here, that they were working, that they were holding a job, that there can be a background check, there can be a data check of them, and if in fact they are clear and they've been here just trying to better their families, well, that is the American dream, and in that situation, they ought to be able to get a guest worker permit. The other thing, we have to use E-Verify. I'm always concerned about the government database and getting access, but in this case, we have to know as a matter of national defense. We have to be able to have that list so people can be verified through the State Department, through their agencies as to who's in this country legally, and if they're not, they need to be sent back. We're not going to have some middle-of-the-night mass deportation, but we've got to start getting a handle on a problem when there's 13 million illegals in this country.
Absolutely. Richard, this is Rick Berry again. Like I said earlier, Richard Lugar pushed for the DREAM Act. If you could kind of quickly maybe explain to people out there what the DREAM Act is and why there needs to be opposition to it.
Yeah. He was a co-sponsor of the DREAM Act, and what the DREAM Act is, it would give some special benefits and privileges to the children of illegal immigrants. Now, that's not to say the children of illegals who are born in this country, because when they're born here, they are United States citizens. And we can argue whether that's a good thing or not, but that's not who we're talking about. We're talking about those people who were ostensibly carried in their parents' arms across the border. The problem with that is, as every parent knows, if you reward bad behavior, are you going to get more of it or less of it? Everybody knows if you reward bad behavior, you're going to get more bad behavior. So if we start giving special benefits, moving them quicker towards amnesty, just because their parents carried them across the border, there are going to be more people carrying their kids across the border, and that's the wrong way to go. The audacity here with this issue for me is that in the lame duck session in 2010, Mr. Lugar, as a co-sponsor of the DREAM Act, helped bring it up to a vote, and it failed. Shortly thereafter, he and Dick Durbin sent a letter to President Obama and Secretary Napolitano telling her, in effect, well, we didn't get it done, but just go ahead and implement it by regulatory authority. Just go ahead and put it in place anyhow. Even though the people's body, the U.S. Senate and House, couldn't have passed it, just go ahead and do it. I mean, you talk about playing into the hands of an overactive executive, which is what the Obama administration is, and that's what Dick Lugar just did. You know, we had an issue that came up during our debate the other night when I made the point that twice he has voted to allow illegals to have access to Social Security funds. And he said, oh, no, I didn't do that. And I turned back to the camera and said, we will post immediately after the debate those two votes. And we did so, because one of the votes was to prohibit them from working in this country illegally under some other fraudulent Social Security number, and then later claiming that work to get Social Security benefits from, and Senator Lugar refused to vote to prohibit that activity.
And this is absolutely the type of insanity that we're trying to get away from.
Exactly.
But you are a staunch supporter of legal immigration.
Certainly.
I think we all are.
Well, but
Yeah.
they're
they're going to say we're not.
Richard
You know what they're
kicking
gonna say
puppies again. You know, we got to. You have stopped doing that, right, Richard?
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear.
You have stopped kicking puppies, right? Like,
I have stopped kicking.
okay,
puppies,
well, that's a good thing, because I saw Lugar had. I'm sorry.
Yes, and I don't feed kittens antifreeze and all other kinds of things that he'll probably try to suggest in the future. It's just amazing that, for all the advertising that's been going on, and I have to go off topic for just a moment, but I'm constantly heard how this campaign is so negative. I hope your listeners note every time you see a TV commercial that has, I'm Richard Mourdock and I authorize this message, those commercials show we'll talk about 2 or 3 bills that Mr. Lugar voted on, and we always have a little graphic citing the date and the bill number, and then I talk about what I would do. They're known in the business as 50-50 ads, 50% of what the other person did, and we document it right on the screen, and then 50% of what we would do. Not once have we seen any ad from Senator Lugar that's coming out really refuting any of our criticisms of his record, and I think that's unfortunate.
And that's what we're going to see from the Obama campaign, I might add.
Exactly. Yeah.
And for our listeners, this is Rick and Rick at Night. I forgot to say this, and we're interviewing United States Senate candidate Richard Mourdock. And again, we're delighted that he's on our show. And the last point you were going to make out of the DREAM Act was there's no amnesty. That was the third prong of your immigration policy,
yeah,
right?
Mr. Lugar's voted for amnesty in the past, and I would not be voting for amnesty. It's rewarding bad behavior, which means we're only going to get more of it. A nation's fundamental purpose is first and foremost to maintain its sovereignty. That's why provide for the common defense is right up there in the preamble. It's about saying, we have to have defense to preserve that sovereignty. If we abdicate our sovereignty by saying the borders are just imaginary lines and not real lines of demarcation, we're going to ultimately make our country weaker, and we're certainly going to change our culture to be something other than the traditional American culture that we've known.
Richard, we have had you on, I think, the first few times for a full hour, and that wasn't long enough, and now we got you for 30 minutes. That wasn't long enough, or it's not nearly going to be long enough. But anyway, I want to bring up a topic. Conservatives, we wake up every day, and there's a different headline every day that just either terrifies us or confounds us about what's going on. I just want to read one headline to you that was on the Drudge Report 2 days ago. The Obama administration says it talked with Muslim Brotherhood to promote small business. What do you take away from that?
I'm almost speechless. I had not heard that one, Rick. I know a senior official of the administration said yesterday the war on terror is over. So I guess if we're going to say the war on terror is over and we want to drop our defenses, now we're going to start foreign aid somehow to help build small businesses through the Muslim Brotherhood. I'm speechless. I don't know what to say to that.
It almost seems like we're going not only pre-9/11, we're going pre-9/11 and we're politically sensitive.
Well, that's right. I mean, this administration is an enigma towards traditional American values. I mean,
well, a spokesman said that the United States is strongly committed to supporting the economic and political reforms that are going on in the region. I think he's specifically speaking of Egypt. But for the listeners out there, the Muslim Brotherhood, I think in their charter, they're committed to the destruction of the Western way of life, and they're committed to the destruction and annihilation of Israel. And, I wish there was a fly on the wall or a hidden microphone in the room so we could have heard exactly what was discussed between the president and the Muslim Brotherhood. It may have been something like what was discussed when he didn't think he was being heard between him and Medvedev as far as wait till the election, and then I'll get a lot of stuff done for you.
It may have indeed. In fact, you mentioned Israel, and forgive me for sounding like a candidate, but again, one of the primary differences between Mr. Lugar and myself, he was the first official to come out on behalf of something called the Saudi Plan, which would cause Israel to withdraw to the 1967 borders. There is nothing more destabilizing in the Middle East than the sign that the United States government may be walking away from its traditional support of Israel. And just by putting those words out there, it undermines the stability in the Middle East, and it's something that is absolutely unacceptable.
The law of the sea. I know that Lugar has supported that. Can you briefly describe what that is, and is that a good idea or not?
Yeah, it's an initiative through the United Nations. It would result in all of the mineral resources, the navigable waters of the oceans basically becoming communal property, so that any nation who went out there and began to exploit, say, the minerals in the deep sea bottoms, and there are a lot of minerals certainly in the deep sea bottoms off the continental shelf, that they would be paying an expensive royalty interest to all the other nations of the world. That the United States would be no different than the other 186 nations, and that it's basically another mass effort to redistribute funds from wealthy nations to poorer nations. I might note that China has already signed on to it, and yet it's already violating it in what it's doing in the South China Sea and in trying to control some vital fishing areas over in that area. It is another example of the United Nations trying to level the playing field, if you will, between the have and have-not nations, and thinking if they do that artificially, somehow it's going to make the world better, and it is not.
Richard, we've got 2 minutes, and I want to just give you the floor for to our Southeast Indiana listening audience. Final 2 minutes you have to say before the election on May 8th.
Sure. Well, I'll tell you, this is such an important primary, and I know there are a lot of people who don't vote in primaries, but I would urge them to do so this time. In Indiana, we all recognize Mr. Lugar's given long service, but we also have to recognize it's time to fight for our values. And as I hope the listeners could hear from this discussion, I do believe in my heart of hearts the things I'm talking about. I am willing to take that fight to Washington, D.C., to stand up not just for Hoosiers, but for what have been the traditional values of the United States. I really believe this election, this general election, is going to be the most important national election since 1860, which of course led to the Civil War. Now, don't mistake that to say that I'm predicting civil war. I'm not. But the country is so polarized from one side to the other. As Lincoln said in his time, the present agitation must persist until one side prevails. One side will prevail here. It will either be that Obama ideology of going towards this more Western European socialist model, or it's going to be a more traditional American model of American exceptionalism where every citizen has that right to rise. I urge your listeners, check us out at richardmourdock.com. If they can help our campaign in the next few days, even as we get to May 8th, it'd be vitally important. We have effort we call Gimme 6. If you can volunteer 6 days on Election Day, sitting
6
in
hours.
the poll or making phone calls, we'd appreciate it.
6 hours.
6 hours.
You said 6 days.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Yeah, just 6 hours. We've got thousands of volunteers across the state who are ready to help, and with that, we're confident we're going to win, and look forward to being back on your program as the Republican nominee in the coming months, and after the first of the year as the junior senator from the state of Indiana.
Richard, this is Rick Berry again. We will be seeing you soon, and I just want to wish you luck. You're a great American. It's been an inspiration to know you, and I'm sure we'll have you on the show again real soon, hopefully as the next senator from Indiana.
Well, thank you, and I'm inspired by the Tea Party people who keep showing up to stand up for their country.
Thank you so much for your time, Richard, and God bless you, my friend.
You too.
Good luck.
That was Richard Mourdock, candidate for Senate from Indiana, and I'd like to introduce to the radio audience a candidate for Indiana State Representative Jim Lucas from Seymour.
Well, hello, Rick. Rick. Thank you for having me here this evening. It's pretty interesting to be standing here in front of the golden gray microphone of WIKI, just like one of our favorite men, Rush Limbaugh. But I appreciate the opportunity to get our message out.
And you were in the Attila the Hun #2 chair. And
yes, Mr. Mourdock is not the easiest act to follow. I mean, he's very knowledgeable, very down-to-earth, very genuine, and always a pleasure to listen to.
Jim, now you're running for the Indiana House of Representatives for the General Assembly. What district are you running for?
District 69. With the new districts this year, they have changed up a little bit, and we seem to have quite a bit more. We're going more east-west this year as opposed to north-south. I ran 2 years ago in the old District 66, and that was my first time for running at the state level. And we won 3 out of 4 counties that year and come within 2 percentage points of knocking off 10-year incumbent. So looking forward to a really good race this year, all new districts, and it is an open seat.
And the area of Jefferson County that you're going to be representing is like the northwest corner of the county?
Yes, we've got Republican, Smyrna, Graham, and Lancaster.
Yeah, it used to be, I think, up until now, our representative covered all of Jefferson County, so it's kind of confusing now. Do you know, if geographically you can name those townships, but kind of the area north? Okay, it's very confusing.
Pretty much the northwestern.
Because I know Randy Fry has a little bit. Can you? Who are your opponents on the Democrat side?
My opponents are Trent Wisner from Jennings County and Jim McCormick from Jackson County. Now, I am from Jackson County. Born and raised in Seymour and lived there my whole life. A little bit of background on me. Lifelong member of Emmanuel Lutheran Church, graduate of Emmanuel Lutheran School, Seymour High School. After high school, I joined the Marine Corps. I'm a veteran of the United States Marine Corps. And as everybody knows, there's no such thing as a former Marine, so I like to refer to us as dormant Marines. Got out of high school, joined the Marine Corps. Been married 17 years. My wonderful wife, Lynn. Hello, Lynn, if you're listening. And we've got 3 beautiful children, Suzanne, Jack, and Maddie. I've been a small business owner for 13 years. And in 2007 is pretty much when my political career began. I started going to city council meetings and couldn't quite understand why they weren't applying the same principles that apply to a small business owner, why they weren't using those in government. So I was raised to, if you're going to have a complaint, get involved. And so I ran for and was elected that year to city council at large. And I'm currently serving my 2nd term on council. While on council, I also sit on redevelopment committee, the Seymour Main Street Economic Development Committee, the board of directors for the new Jackson County Learning Center, and I chair the Downtown Retail Development Committee.
And you also started the Tea Party up in Seymour.
In 2009, Mike Sodrell come down, and he was going around. We had a little event there, about 25, 30 people, and people kept asking, what can we do, what can we do? And I'm like, well, I passed around a yellow notepad, and I said, if anybody's interested, write down your name and email address, and we'll see what we can't get started. So with my wife and I have to include her, it was our money, we rented a facility and ran a couple newspaper ads, and we appealed to everybody. I don't view politics as Republican and Democrat anymore. It's how you view the role of government. So the first newspaper ad, we don't care what color you are, how much money you have or don't have, what your religion is or isn't, what class you may be in, what your political beliefs are, other than the conservative principles of our natural right to life, liberty, property, rule of law, limited government, accountability, and responsibility. And that first meeting, we had over 65 people show up, and it was really encouraging. And people, the funny thing was, people stood up and they said, "What are we going to do?" I'm like, "Well, I don't know, but this is a start." So our second meeting, we did the exact same thing again. Our second meeting, we had a Dr. Jack Schmidt from IU come down, very liberty-minded individual and conservative principles, and very knowledgeable about the principles and views of the Founding Fathers. Dr. Schmidt come down at an evening, at a little meeting, and we had almost 130 people show up. So not a bad start out of the gate. And from there, it just grew and blossomed and took off with the national feelings of people, again, disgruntled Republicans mostly, that were just fed up with the spending and the drifting away from the principles that made this country great.
You know, I'll tell our listeners out there, the reason Bruce can't see me, and that's why he keeps cutting me off when I try to say something, but I moved my microphone over here where he can see me, so hopefully the War Eagle won't cut me off anymore.
You really think that's it?
But anyway, Jim, this is interesting because Rick Roos and I, a couple years ago, we kind of would look at each other and say, "Man, when is somebody going to start a tea party here in our county?" And we waited and we thought, surely somebody's going to do it. Finally, we decided, hey, nobody's going to do it, I guess, so let's do it ourselves.
Just do it, right?
And so it's kind of the same thing. But anyway, if you want to go in real quick about your platform, and do you have your opponents stated a platform? I know Trent Wisner is a young guy. I don't know anything at all about your other opponent, but I know Trent is, I think he's a union guy. And I haven't seen anything about their platforms. I don't expect you to know anything about their platforms, but if you want to go a little bit about what you want to get done, your philosophy on state government, and where you want to go with it.
I've met Mr. Wisner only one time. I know Mr. McCormick from the past. Both men are nice men. I'm not going to get into mudslinging or anything like that.
Sure. Yeah.
I want to focus on my message, our message for the campaign. I do know that Mr. Wisner is promoting the middle class, and he's for the working Hoosiers. Now, what we've come to find out in the past is working Hoosiers seems to be code for union. I am not anti-union. If that's what people want to do, that's great. I'm all for that. I am for choice, individual rights, and that's one of the things. If I am elected as state representative for District 69, when I get to Indianapolis, I am going to be fighting and working for everyone's right, and that would include the right to life, liberty, property, rule of law, free markets, limited government, accountability, and responsibility. I'm not going up there just to work for a particular class, or I don't know how you define working Hoosier. I have yet to have anybody explain to me objectively what is a working Hoosier. I know unions they comprise about 11 or 12% of the working class in Indiana. What about the other 89%? I
was going to say, we did find out not too long ago that a mother at home with her children is not a working person.
Yes.
Well, in some people's eyes, but obviously in our eyes, they're the hardest workers of all. But we did hear from some people
Hillary Rosen.
They weren't actually. Yes, exactly.
I have a small confession to make then, if that's the case. My wife, Lynn, has not worked a day of her life then for the last 16 years as a stay-at-home mother. And equally offensive, the men should find that, because I know in the early years, my wife and I committed to her staying at home and raising our children. I was working 2 and at one time 3 jobs, because it is tough to get by without that second income. And if that's what people want, great. That should be their choice. But to be criticized because people choose to make the sacrifices to do that just goes beyond my level of understanding, really.
This is Rick and Rick at Night. We're the voice of liberty in the Ohio River Valley, and we're talking to Jim Lucas, candidate for the Indiana House of Representatives in District 69. Jim, I just got, the other day, I got another mailer. And this mailer offends me. I do not like franked mail from either party. But this one particularly is egregious because we, down here, and I wasn't going to rain on his parade because he's going to retire. But this is from Dave Cheatham. Now, Dave Cheatham, as our listeners will remember, made an unfortunate analogy between because of his walking away from the General Assembly last year, and he made an analogy, or one of his first graders in his wife's class made an analogy that his walking away from the State House was somehow parallel to a deployment of a soldier in Afghanistan. Now, we haven't seen much of him down here. We had one sighting of him at Riverfest, but we never did see him at the 4-H fair. Saw him at one third house meeting. But I don't like the idea of what he put on there, let alone it was a nice little multicolor arrangement, and it says paid U.S. postage paid Indiana House of Representatives. I didn't like it when Lee Hamilton did it. I don't like it when anybody else does it. One of the things I want you to do when you get in there is stop that practice.
I will do my best. One of the things, again, if elected as state representative for District 69, I want to keep people apprised of what's going on. And again, I'm not going to reach out to just Republicans or just conservatives. I want to reach out and represent everyone. And that is something that I will make here tonight a pledge. I will never participate in a walkout, period. I will never abandon my post. I will never leave District 69 without representation, no matter what issue comes up. I will stand up there and we're going to work through it. And I will come back, and I plan on holding town hall meetings, third house meetings. I will do my very level best to make each and every one of them, and I don't care how hostile the crowd may be, we are going to sit down and talk about the issues.
Now, I'd like to tell the listeners out there that, and a lot of you would be in Jim's district when he does get elected. We got about 20 minutes left. That's your perfect time to call in. Our local number is 593-0953. That's 593-0953. And War Eagle, I think you got the toll-free number. Is that right?
Toll-free, 877-953-0953. That's 877-953-0953. And our loyal minion, Lisa's not here to do her Facebook deal tonight, but if you call in from across the country, your calls are welcome. We've also got... thanks to our great friend Josh South, our show is available on podcast at rickandrickshow.com. That's rickandrickshow.com. We go back to Dr. Arnn in our show in November as president of Hillsdale, and hopefully we'll have all the last year on podcast, as I think, as Rush says, these will eventually wind up in the Radio Hall of Fame.
You know, one thing I want to bring up is... Again, we said we're not anti-union, and I think maybe a good thing for Jim once he gets his feet wet is this right-to-work thing, and I'm sure you kept up with that. You're well aware of what that issue meant, what it means to Indiana. But I still think there's a lot of people that don't understand what right-to-work is. If you get elected, that's going to be an ongoing issue probably with your constituents, with questions and what it's doing for Indiana. Anyway, if you can kind of explain your knowledge of it, even though you weren't involved in the process, but you will be once you're elected, your feelings about it and what you see that it is.
Basically, the right to work, from the way I understand and take it, is nobody is forced to pay into the union if they don't want to. So, basic question begs, what's wrong with choice? And that's, again, throw out all the teeth gnashing and the hollering and the name calling, but it boils down to choice, which is one of our basic individual rights.
And freedom of choice, that's an American tradition.
Absolutely.
Going back 235 years. We do have a caller, and Heather, this is Rick Berry. Do you want to go ahead?
Well, I have a question in general for anyone there who's available to answer. My name is Heather, and I keep hearing in the news about Obama's attack on coal. My husband works at the power plant, and my question is it in danger of being closed? I'm very concerned about this.
From what I
Jim, you wanna
understand
start
at the
that one off?
federal level, I mean, Obama has openly declared war on coal and fossil fuels, and he has stated on record that he wants our energy costs to skyrocket. I would, as a member of the state legislature, I would look at every way possible to promote Indiana's independence and see if we could use our natural resources, coal being one of them, to the utmost of our abilities. I mean, from everything I've heard and read, Indiana is and America, the Midwest, is the Saudi Arabia of coal. So explain to me why we're not using this.
And Heather, he actually did say, and we had in our debate on Saturday, the Tea Party, that as a result of his cap and trade plan, electrical rates would necessarily skyrocket because coal plants would have to retrofit in order to satisfy the EPA. The EPA, I think there's a electrical plant up in Lawrenceburg that I think they're going to be down next year. So there's a real fear. I mean, we can't tell you categorically you should be afraid, but I mean, you should vote for the people that are going to get this rascal out of there.
Well, here's what drives me crazy, not to interrupt it, but, you know, we've got people out there right now who have to choose between meals and heating their home. Now, this comes from the party that supposedly is looking out for the poor. What's going to happen? I got budget billing at home, and my budget billing went up 15% this year with a mild winter. We're seeing that we spent $600 million down here at our power plant. Now, a lot of people are not aware of the fact that they're the ones that are going to have to pay for this, not AEP. They don't pay for that out of the goodness of their heart. The people being billed by Duke Energy have to pay for it. So this is what drives me crazy, because there's no alternative to substitute for coal, gas, oil. I mean, we can look at windmills, we can look at solar, sure, but they're not going to replace anything like what we're trying to get rid of in the very near future. Isn't that right, Jim?
Now, I've been accused before of not being the sharpest tool in the shed, so bear with me on this. I like to keep things simple. We've had a Department of Energy since 1979, and this is still an issue. And that right there, I encourage people to start thinking for yourselves. Do not swallow what the mainstream media or other people try to run down your throat without asking the question, why? Why do we have an energy problem? We've been putting men in steel tubes, nuclear submarines, since the 50s, and we're still fighting nuclear energy. There's, 10 years hasn't been a new nuclear plant because of bureaucracy and red tape? You know,
because of a movie called The China Syndrome.
Natural gas.
I'm really serious when I say that.
You're
too.
right, but natural gas, coal, nuclear, oil, we have more undiscovered oil up in the northern part of the country. Jobs program, but we can't build a pipeline. Canada's, wanting to ship down here. There are just so many things that just defy basic common sense that one has to just take a second or two and ask, why? No, wait, this doesn't make sense. Quit listening to the experts.
I saw a thing in the news today, too. It said the cylinder plant is a biohazard, a major biohazard. It's going to cost millions to clean it up.
Stuff you can't make up.
So even the green energy, I mean, there's a lot of things with pollution that go along with green energy. We know windmills are killing birds
yes.
by the millions.
And Spain has tried this, and I've read reports where Spain discovered that for every green job that was created, there were like 2.4 or 2.9 jobs that were lost.
And Spain's going the way of Greece. Heather, as you can see, you really your question didn't really touch a nerve with the group here. Wish we could answer your question better and with a little more passion.
To your point, Heather, I would be all for saving your husband's job. If that
I
helps.
think she's probably hung up, but that was a good question. I'm
All
glad
right.
she called.
This is Rick and Rick at Night. We're the voice of liberty in the Ohio River Valley, and we're talking to our good friend Jim Lucas, candidate for Indiana House of Representatives in District 69. Jim, one of the things that I got in front of the Republican Platform Committee, and I said I had a little problem with the way the Republicans were kind of running things this year, because it seemed like they indeed passed $157 million spending reduction over the next 10 years, but and there was a but there, they enacted a new $80 million a year entitlement called full day kindergarten, which is going to cost $800 million of new spending over the next 10 years. So instead of, it's $843 million of new spending that I don't know if we can afford. And I know you maybe not want to touch full day kindergarten, but with that and the smoking ban, this is a Republican General Assembly, but not a conservative General Assembly.
During my speeches and talks, and this is something I will tell anybody, I tell people that I am a passionate conservative masquerading as a Republican. Again, these new programs, they have to make sense. Now, everybody keep in mind, again, keeping it simple, what government does for one person, it does to another person. And John Locke, I've got this as a skin on my laptop. Government has no other end but the preservation of property. Now, I'm not against full day kindergarten, as long as we can warrant that it is providing a good service. Can we determine, are we getting results? You know, those are things that'd be interesting seeing. I'm not against government. Obviously, education is first and foremost. Education and jobs. You're going to hear that ad nauseum because those are so important.
Education is in the state constitution.
Absolutely. So, I mean, some of the teachers out there that say the Republican Party's trying to attack education. No, we're not. I mean, I have 3 children, and I want to see all children educated to the best of their abilities. When you get government coming in and one size fits all, you've got to be very, very careful with that.
And my wife's a teacher, so I know exactly what you're
saying.
saying.
You know, one of the biggest.
We do have a caller.
Oh, great.
Rick, are you there?
I am. Hi, Mr. Lucas.
Hello, Rick.
Rick, it can be Rick, and Jim. Go ahead, Rick, with your question.
Always room for another Rick.
Absolutely.
Hey, Mr. Lucas, when you win and you're able to start working in Indianapolis, can you just give us an idea of some of the things that are near and dear to you that you would like to work on once you get in Indianapolis? And I'll take my call or the answer off the air. Thank you.
That's a great question.
Oh, thank you. One of the things I want to work on, obviously, get up there, get to meet people on both sides of the aisle. That's one of the things. As a small business owner, it's not my way. I have to compromise. I have to learn what the customer wants, what it's going to take to get them to do business with me. Same thing when I get to Indy. I'm going to reach across to my Democratic colleagues and get to know them and let them get to know me and develop a relationship with them. But one of the first things, obviously, is education. I know a lot of teachers are nervous. There are new systems coming down the pike, new rules and regulations. I want to hold the parents accountable. That's one of the things in this discussion about education. I keep hearing, well, we're going to hold the parents accountable. We're going to hold the schools accountable, the administration. What about the parents? We have to get them not just involved, but accepting responsibility for their child's education. I never could understand why we want to look at a system where we throw so many rules and regulations on teachers, basically tie their hands and hold them accountable for so many things that are completely outside of their control. That's one of the big ones. Jobs, it's not the role or really reality of government to provide jobs. They can't. Government cannot provide jobs. The only thing government can do is provide an atmosphere that is conducive for job creation. Absolutely. And down in Seymour's in a boom right now. I mean, we've got Cummins, Ison, Valeo, Sylvania, and many other, O&K America, many others. I sit on city council on redevelopment. It is absolutely amazing how a small town of 20,000 can literally have hundreds of millions of dollars investment going on right now, and it's because of the atmosphere that's been created down there.
You know, one thing I've noticed, Jim, and one thing I really respect about you is, and most conservative candidates are not afraid to put out on social media, in the paper, what they believe in. We've heard many conservative pundits say that liberals are afraid to actually say what they stand for, because if they actually say what they stand for, they'd never get elected. So they have a tendency maybe more to attack what you're for rather than say what they're for. And I see that all the time, but I really respect that about you. I think that's how I first got to know you is the fact that you were putting everything out there that you believe in knowing that there's a lot of people out there that don't agree with what you're saying, but at least you're putting your beliefs out there and what you would do.
There are 4 foundations to my beliefs, other than the conservative principles that I mentioned earlier, but truth, facts, reason, and logic. If you operate on that foundation, where can you go wrong? And I will talk to anybody. I am not afraid. If I'm the only person, after I'm elected, and I come to a town hall meeting in a room full of 100 diehard union teachers, electrical workers, whatever, I will not be afraid to sit there and have a rational, logical conversation with them. And that's how we come to agreement. Or I know everybody's not going to always agree with how I stand on things or what my view is, but you're going to know where I stand, and I most certainly, I give you my word that I will listen to your beliefs.
You know, and if we get back to the federal level, if you look at Obamacare, the only way Obamacare was passed was to deceive and lie about what it was actually going to do, what the cost was. It took bribery of people in their own party to get it passed.
Well, and there's four description of the other side of the coin too. It's guilt, fear, lies, and deceit.
There you go.
And a lot of times that applies to the laws that are rammed down our throat under cover of darkness at the last minute without being read.
One thing I hope you'll consider, Jim, is having town hall meetings when the General Assembly's not in session, because and I appreciate the Chamber of Commerce, providing those venues, but I remember Rick and I, we had 4 town hall meetings when Barron Hill wouldn't, and Obamacare times 2, cap and trade, and illegal immigration. And one thing people need to remember: a week from tomorrow is the primary day. You need to come out and vote, because if you don't vote, guess what? And I tell people that don't really understand the issues, that maximizes my vote, because I'm going to vote only once, and I do have an idea of who I am. But you need to get out and vote, whether you're Democrat or Republican. And down here, half our Tea Parties are Democrats, conservatives, but you need to come out and vote.
Too many people have sacrificed too much for us to not take just a few minutes out of our day to go exercise that most basic cornerstone right of every republic, free republic. And it's a shame that more people don't take advantage of that.
That was very well said, my friend.
And we're going to be back on May 21st, because the weekend after that is Memorial Day. And we're going to be back May 21st for our next exciting episode of the Rick and Rick at Night Show. And Jim, we do thank you for being here, pal.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
We're going to have you back again. And we'd like to thank our friend Tom for working the board tonight. And one thing that I said at our Tea Party this weekend was from a Prague newspaper: the danger to America is not Barack Obama, but a citizenry capable of entrusting a man like him with the presidency. I'll read the rest of the quote later. But good night, Madison and America. God bless and keep you, our listeners, and this, the most wonderful country in the world. For our local audience, we're going to the Boneyard Grill. Christian, tell us a poor one.
Thanks, Jim.
Thank you.
Good night, everybody. God bless you.
The views and opinions expressed on this program are not necessarily the views of Wagon Wheel Broadcasting, WIKI Radio, its management, employees, or advertisers. Paid for by the Rick and Rick at Night Show.